Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Dr. Don Egle. He is the Vice President for Enrollment, Marketing, and Communications at Letourneau University, as well as the founder and CEO of the Kyer Group, a results focused brand and leadership coaching company. With 25 years of experience as a C suite leader, Dr. Egle builds transformational brands that cultivate love, trust, and admiration. Don Egle, it's so great to see you and have you on the Voice of Influence podcast.
It's good to see you, Andrea. Thank you for the invitation.
You know, your wife, Brienne, is such a dear friend of mine, and we don't get to see each other much because you guys are in Texas, we're in Nebraska. But a few years back, we had the opportunity to visit with you and learn more about the research that you're doing and did around joy and leadership. And I thought, I've got to have this guy on the podcast after he finishes that dissertation because I want to know about what you learned. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation today.
Same here. Thank you.
I mean, I wanted to kind of talk about your experience and expertise and communications and leadership, but I really would like to start with this question. When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I'm sure as most young boys grow up wanting to play some sort of professional sport. So for me,
Okay,
it was for
okay.
me it was baseball. You start to get into high school, and then you can better assess your ability to assess the length of time you'll be able to play and at what level. So mine stopped after high school, but um, for a
What
while,
position did you play?
third base.
Third
You know,
base.
but
Okay.
but growing up in Michigan, we would anybody that's familiar with baseball season, we'd open up in the snow and we'd be wearing four sweatshirts under our jerseys. So it wasn't necessarily the greatest part of the country to open up baseball season, but thoroughly enjoyed it. Wanted to play, pro ball. But I would say in high school, a couple of things really surfaced for me. One was an architect, and then also thought about being an attorney.
Huh.
Uh, I'm neither of those this many years later, but I did think about getting into that. And I kind of took a little bit of an unusual path from high school into college. I ended up taking a total of 3 years off of college, but did that at two different moments. So after high school, took a year off, went for my freshman year. As with many students, they're trying to figure out what do I want to do? And this is, as most people, and I'm sure all your listeners are familiar with, higher education is a major investment. And so being able to try to, make sure that you go in with a plan so you can get the most out of it and get the biggest return on the investment was important to me. So that freshman year, I was still trying to kind of figure those things out. And then I actually took a couple years off after that. And it was that period of time where I kind of began to explore this field of public relations and professional communications, and started to do a real deep dive on things like crisis communications and issues management.
Hmm.
And that was kind of the beginning part of the journey. And then went back to school, finished my undergraduate degree in public relations and communications, and so that's how I ended up getting into that field initially.
How did it click for you that maybe that would be a good spot for you?
Yeah, it's during that 2 year period, someone very kind of close to me in my network had really encouraged me to um, think deeply and reflect, and really be thoughtful and intentional in the process I was using to determine what my options were. Trying to align, what do I believe God has gifted me with? What do I enjoy doing? What do I care deeply about? And then what different industries and disciplines kind of match that? And so that was great advice, but then you're sitting there as a relatively young person going, what do I do with that? How do I go about finding that process? And so for me at the time, it was before, I know this is going to, I will date myself here. It was before the internet. So it wasn't like I was going to just go to Google. And so I remember going to our public library in the town that I was living in Michigan, which is where I grew up. And Andrea, I spent hours. upon hours. All the free time I had, I spent there in the library, and that's how I did my research. And so I was starting to look at, just different industries and disciplines I was aware of or I had heard about, and then I'd dig into books and magazines and newspapers and things like that. And I'll never forget the first major book that caught my attention was a crisis communications book,
Hmm.
and that was at the public library.
Wow. And it really got your attention and grabbed you, huh?
It did. I thought, what an incredible, as I was thinking about that specific industry, I thought, what an incredible opportunity um, to connect with people in a very meaningful way and be a bridge.
Hmm.
And when I started to think about, the different applications of being a bridge, and the relationship elements of that, that's what really caught my attention. And then over the years, as I started to really develop and strengthen my thinking, um, and people, mentors kind of were speaking into my life, I was able to really refine that. I'll never forget early in my career, it was very public relations centric early in my career, but um, uh, someone, in a very significant role within the industry of public relations said, public relations is about connecting the interests of the organization, the goals of the organization with the public interest. And so not to oversimplify it, but that really starts to crystallize what you're able to do. I think that now fast forward many, many, many years, I think that that statement is so true. I think there's some questions of how much of that's actually happening. When we take a look at information and news and public discourse and how industries communicate and public policy that influences it and all those other related things that we talk about as a society, when you think about how are we communicating to people that we're trying to connect with in a very authentic and meaningful way, if you miss out on that or you're not upfront and honest and truthful, if you're not authentic in who you are and what you're about, if you don't do those things, you've put yourself and the organization at a significant disadvantage. So now I wasn't thinking in those terms when I discovered this at the public library, but the thought of being able to participate in something like that was really caught my attention. And so anyway, that's how I got into the field, and that's where I landed after I decided that baseball, law, and architecture were not going to be my path.
So, did you have a pretty good idea that you were naturally gifted at speaking to groups? Because not everybody feels comfortable in that kind of a role. So when you saw that and that idea of the bridging being the bridge, did you see that in yourself? Did you see these sorts of things in yourself when you saw this potential um, career path for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Part of my time at the public library as I was researching is I'll never forget, to this day, I could walk into that library, assuming that they didn't move the furniture. I could walk to the exact table and chair I sat at, and I took a legal pad, blank legal pad, and this is not an earth-shattering exercise. Plenty of people have done it, but I took a blank piece of paper, drew a line down the middle, and I started to list out all of the things either I was interested in, that I loved to do, that I thought maybe I would have some sort of skill set, or maybe God in some ways has gifted me in certain areas, and then tried to align that with different industries and disciplines that might match. And so then I started to take a look at where the match was, but then I also had the opportunity to do some more reflection to say, okay, do I really want to do that? Do I really believe that I have something to offer there, or are these a bunch of skills that I'd love to lean into, but there's a whole lot to learn and a whole lot to develop. And so I think for me, it was more of an acknowledgement of less about what I knew. It was more about I know enough to lean into those things. I know enough to explore it further.
Mm-hmm.
I will say I did not look forward to speech class in high school and college. Um, Fast forward many years, I love the opportunity to speak to small groups and large groups, and part of the storytelling or areas of expertise or just experiences that might be beneficial and meaningful to that audience. I love that today, but I didn't start there, and that was a real journey. Um, but it also helped for me to pivot my thinking, when it came to communication, to put the emphasis and um, the focus on the audience and where they are. And when that pivot happened for me, it was really transformational in how I look to communicate and speak and all of the related efforts to connect with people, because it was far more about what I was saying and how it was connecting to the people that were listening, and that was a real game changer for me.
Mm. Yeah, I had a pivotal moment at one point too where I realized that I could either fear the audience or I could love them. And then it was like a no-brainer.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that I don't get nervous sometimes, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing that was really great too is when you get into those environments, and you're preparing to address a small group or a large group, is to just know there might be one thing, even if it's one thing, that we share, that we talk about, that could really be the very thing that person needs. And I have found that to be so meaningful over the years, to know that, hey, I hope my prayer is that something I say, can be an encouragement to someone, or it can offer them an insight that allows them to think differently, or to enhance their perspective, or to grow their business, or to care more deeply about a relationship and everything in between. And um, that's when I think communication, speaking, and all of the things that are related, that's where I think it gets really fun, because you can start to now focus on what impact it potentially has on others.
Yeah, yeah. You also mentioned crisis communication, and I find this really fascinating. I would imagine that you've had the opportunity to be in front of the microphone or in at the place of being able to communicate in crisis situations in the past. What what happens? What happens in you? I'm wondering if do you get more like dialed in? You know what I mean? Like focused and um also just the process of getting to the point of knowing what you're going to say. I'm just wondering what you want to say about that.
Yeah. Well, it's such a big conversation,
Yeah.
because, as you know too, there's when you deal with the macro topic of crisis communications and issues management, there's so much important context that goes into it, industry, the specifics of situations. I will say, though, preparation to me it's just so important. And we hear that, right? We hear that in organizations all the time. Well, we're going to prepare, we're going to have a plan for, and then all these different scenarios. That's a wonderful exercise. But preparation, it's amazing how much preparation will help with uncertainty and the anxiety that comes for an organization, or comes to an organization, because you know the plan. And so when things occur, you hope they don't, but when they do, or if, most of the time it's when they happen and not if, you activate the plan, you work the plan. And so that's a big part of just the experiences I've had. The other part is clarity of message and clarity of what we're saying to people, what's most important. Of course, what's underscoring all of this is to do it in a truthful and honest way.
Mm.
I know I guess it's a given, it should be a given, but oftentimes we see examples where that's not happening. But that is obviously core to all of it. But preparation, and then clarity of message. And then I think the other thing too is in the midst of those crises, oftentimes people feel rushed, because the context and the situation, everything about it is rushed. And that's the other thing is sometimes you have to slow down a little bit. You have to slow down. You don't want to run too slow, and you want to be responsive. But I think slowing everything down allows you to make sure that you're not making a bad situation worse. It allows you to make sure that you are communicating clearly. It also allows you to make sure that what you're communicating is done both in a timely fashion, but in a comprehensive way. we've all seen examples to where folks, in an attempt to get out in front of something, they maybe move too quickly, and it's either inaccurate information or it's incomplete information. So, um, and then I think the other thing that comes to mind is just as much as you plan and as much as you prepare, there's always things that you encounter that you weren't expecting, or um, things that require you to pivot a little bit in your approach. And so yeah, it's been interesting over the years. I've had all kinds of unique experiences. The majority of my career has been in higher education, but I've spent some time in nonprofit and consulting, industries, and then of course I've done a lot of my own consulting and coaching. And so you just, with all those experiences in different parts of the country and large university, in the case of my work in higher ed, large universities, smaller universities, private, public, um, and then you invite thousands of people at times, depending on the size of the institution. Um, there's all kinds of things that you have to prepare for, and I've seen my fair share of those, and um, they're never fun. They're actually quite difficult, um, but I've just found to stay focused, work the plan, listen intently. And I also think to not forget to really lean into empathy and being empathetic to all of the different conditions and circumstances and people impacted in these situations. And so those are some things, Andrea, that come to mind that have been meaningful.
Mm, yeah. Have you ever said something in a situation like that where you're like, oh gosh, I wish I wouldn't have said that? That'd probably be one of my biggest concerns, is that I would say something that I didn't mean to say.
I'm sure if I were to go back and all those,
Oh, but
experience,
it doesn't
I'm
stick
I'm
out.
yeah, I'm sure that there would be
That's great.
things. I'm sure there would be things. I'm like, I needed to say that different, or I wish I would have said more. I think that's the other
Mm,
thing that's interesting. Sometimes it's always about, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or I said it wrong. Sometimes there's situations where you're like, you know what? I wish I would have been able to say more about that, or maybe I could have said more, and for whatever reason, just at the time, you didn't feel like that was necessary or the right thing to do. And then the other part is it recorded, is it live, and all of these things. And so those have been different experiences that you walk away and you're like, okay, that live interview is over. I really wish I would have said this. Um,
how do you
that kind
deal
of goes
with
back.
that regret, you know?
Yeah, a lot of times, and this goes back to the relationship piece. If sometimes you can, follow up with that individual and just say,
Mm.
hey, by the way, I wanted to share this with you, and it you know came to my attention that I needed to provide more information to you on this. So that would be an example. I've also represented people
Mm.
who get done with, some sort of interaction or communication or speech or interview, or um, and they're some of the first to say, I wish I would have said that differently. And so that's the other part of the, in my experiences with the media and crisis communications, is when you represent people, um, and you're not the one doing the interview, they are, and then they get done with it and they're like, hey, you know what, I probably should have said that different, or what they said created a ripple effect in something. And so then part of that crisis communications work is working um, to either settle it down or to course correct. I've had a number of those situations, and they're always interesting, and they're every single one of them's a little different.
Hmm. I'm sure. I mean, you were talking about being truthful, and I know that that's got to be, and then also having the potential regret of not saying enough or wishing you could have said more, which brings up the idea of there's like being authentic, but then there's also being transparent. And it seems like it's a given that you should be authentic, but the transparency piece, how much you share, I'm sure is a little tricky.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that just depends on the issue.
Yeah.
One thing that I think from a societal perspective that we see a lot oftentimes, are serious topics that have a lot of built-in confidentiality to it. That's one of the things that's most difficult because there's a lot of situations where you're like, well, I sure wish as an organization, I wish we could say more, or there's another party, I wish I could communicate more, or they're reporting on or that's being talked about that story, but it's incomplete. I know it's incomplete, but because of some of those confidentiality items, sometimes it's legal matters. It just kind of puts those constraints, and that's always a little bit more difficult to nuance because you wish you would be able to get in and talk about it more. Um, but um, but I think the other thing too with the authenticity piece is for both organizations and leaders or individuals, know what you're about. Know
Yeah.
what you're about. Um, You're not going to get it right all the time. Nobody's perfect. But it really is amazing how freeing it is when you can go into a variety of situations and you know exactly who you are. You know exactly what you're about. You know exactly what you stand for. You know exactly what your convictions are. And then you know how you want to represent and express yourself in those things.
Yeah.
And I think that is a freeing moment for individuals. I think it's freeing for leaders as they lead within organizations and lead teams. And I think it's also freeing for organizations. And again, I know that when you get large, complex organizations, to try to replicate that kind of mindset across a very large organization has its own unique challenges. But I think it still applies. Think of the organizations that respond really well to those types of events. They're often very, very, very clear on what they're about. And the ones that struggle, oftentimes, they're trying to be a little bit of everything to everyone all the time, and they end up being nothing to no one at any time. And I think that I know we'll get into this in a little bit, whether we're talking about brands or organizational leadership or individuals as they lead and grow as a leader. When you try to walk in that gray space all the time and you're trying to be everything to everyone all the time, you end up being nothing to no one at any time. And your ability to bust through the noise and to set yourself apart and create distinctiveness, both organizationally in the marketplace and as a leader, becomes really, really tricky because people are like, I don't know exactly where they are or what they stand for. And then it also leads to, if they're comparing that with something else, they're like, that doesn't look a whole lot different than some things that I don't
Exactly.
really care deeply about. And, we see that a lot in Christian higher education, for example. At Letourneau University, which is where I've been for the last almost 10 years, we share with families and students all the time. We are very clear. When we say we are a Christian university, we mean it. And we talk to them about why that is and how we go about that. But that is what God has called us to, and that's core to our mission. And we're going to stand firmly with boldness and courage and compassion, but we're not going to deviate off of that mission that God has called us to. And that's freeing because you can be very, very clear
Hmm.
with other people. It's when you start to waffle on everything to where communication gets to be a mess, your identity in the marketplace becomes a mess, trust begins to erode, and then all of the other things that follow.
One more thread of little conversation here around your current role at Letourneau. I'm wondering, you know, it's not easy being a higher education institution at this point, um, and especially to be in kind of at the helm of enrollment. I'm wondering how you approach enrollment now, how you're looking at it. What are you looking forward to? What are your concerns?
Yeah, it's higher education, even not just Christian higher education, but higher
Yeah.
education as a whole. There are so many layers to just running a university and college, and the all of the trends have continued to evolve, right? I mean, the one of the more recent is the demographic changes happening within the United States specifically. about just the overall declining number of just the total number of people is getting a little, it's shrinking, or the number of students that are intending to go to college. But I think that, and there's an enormous amount of competition, right? And so when you have a supply and demand, scenario, and you have an enormous amount of competition, it's all the more reason to know exactly what you're about, kind of what we were talking about a minute ago, and and then also the why people should pay attention, why what you're doing is relevant to them, what is it doing to add value. And I think that's something that I'd love to see evolve more within all of higher education, including Christian higher education, is to continue to lean into how do we add value to the marketplace, how do we add value to students, their lives, families. Because as I mentioned a little earlier, higher ed is such an investment, and
Mm.
every good investment should have an excellent return on investment. And I think there's some really interesting discussion and debate happening about, the value of a degree. And I think the danger with it is oftentimes those are just these macro level kind of all-encompassing conversations. Everything kind of gets put into this bucket. And then all of a sudden we blink and everyone's saying, well, college isn't worth it. Well, I don't think that's a fair discussion. But I do think that families and students asking the question, when I make this investment, I need to know what happens after that. I need to know what my return is on that investment. I believe that is absolutely fair and appropriate for the market to be asking and families to be asking. And then that's the responsibility now on higher ed, universities and colleges to answer that question. And some answer it better than others. So, for us at Letourneau, one of the things that has been very important is, um, we're all about leaning into what God has called us to. We have a very distinct mission, and for your viewers and listeners, I know that every college and university thinks it's the most special place in the world, and so it's not to minimize that, because I think a lot of institutions have a very unique and compelling story. But Letourneau has an amazing organizational saga. We were not founded by a denomination. We were not founded by a church or a pastor. We were founded by a Christian businessman, or a business couple, RG and Evelyn Letourneau. And I won't give you the whole history unless you want to dig into it. But in essence, RG Letourneau has over 300 patents to his name. And in essence, he literally transformed some of the largest industries in the last century. For example, he a lot of the modern day earth moving equipment that you see, the massive equipment, that was all created originally by R.G. Letourneau. And in World War II, between 70 and 75% of all of the earth moving equipment used by the Allied forces was R.G. Letourneau equipment.
Wow.
And the offshore oil platforms were invented by R.G. Letourneau. So he was an inventor, a builder, an engineer, and so that is absolutely core, to the DNA of Letourneau University. And what happened was, he had relocated one of his major manufacturing facilities in the 1940s, here to Longview, Texas. And as they were flying into Longview, they flew over, an army hospital, and an abandoned army hospital. That is what is now the modern day campus for Letourneau. Now, of course, it doesn't look like an army hospital anymore after this many years. But at the time, the Letourneaus were focused on how do we prepare and um, uh, uh, kind of retrain, if you will, the returning GIs, giving them a skill set to re-enter the workforce. So that was the beginning stages of Letourneau, university, where the workers would work in the manufacturing facilities for a few days. They'd be in class uh, the other few days. And so that kind of core mission of what God was doing through the life of RG and Evelyn Letourneau, but then also the work that's been done at the university, is a very compelling and unique story. that's still present today. And so, for example, Letourneau University was the first Christian university to have an ABET accredited engineering program. We have the only accredited comprehensive aviation program in the state of Texas. And so we work in aviation, engineering, health, business, science, and math, and very much of a leading STEM university. But it's more than that. It's a well-rounded university to where we believe that that the liberal arts and the humanities, where you see a lot of on college campuses, are not mutually exclusive to STEM education. That in fact, they actually benefit from one another. That families don't have to choose between one another or one or the other. Instead, it's this unique blend of kind of what we call a polytechnic education, a Christian polytechnic education, to where we bring multiple disciplines together, where there's a unique blend of theory and practice, where we prepare you for vocational and industry preparedness from day one. We want you in premier lab experiences from day one. We don't want you to wait till your senior year to do that. We want you to work with leading scholars and industry professionals from day one. We don't want you to sit in a lecture hall of 500 people where your name is not known. That is really important because we're the only that type of institution in all of Christian higher education. Now, in the public space, there would be a lot of names that would ring a bell for folks. Cal Poly and MIT and Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech, and so it's very unique to Christian higher ed, but the topic of kind of polytechnic and technically focused education is not necessarily unique to higher ed. So all that to say, in summary, what we've been saying to combat what's happening in higher education is we've been sharing with the marketplace, but more specifically, families and students, homeschool networks and churches, business leaders and community leaders. There are three things we want people to know about what God's doing at Letourneau. First of all, and I mentioned this earlier, we're a sincerely and authentically Christian university. We care deeply about the individual growth, spiritual growth of the student, the individual student. You don't have to be a Christian to come to Letourneau, but many are. If you come to Letourneau and you're not, then our hope is that if you're not ready to grow in your walk with Christ, that you'd at least be introduced to the gospel story of Jesus Christ. Number two is you're joining a community, in large part of fellow believers, to grow in community. And then number three is we want you to see your vocation, God's calling on your life. We want you to not just be an engineer. We want you to see engineering through the lens of what does it mean to be a Christian engineer, or a Christian pilot, or a Christian nurse, or a Christian entrepreneur, or a Christian scientist, or a Christian teacher. There are a lot of amazing places. As a quick aside, there's a lot of amazing places where people can choose where to go to school. You can get a great engineering degree or name the discipline at a lot of places. But most of those places are not teaching you to look at that discipline through the lens of how God designed it. That is transformative because it's no longer just about the engineer. So that's kind of promise one. Promise two is about the highly applied and integrated learning environment that I was talking about. We want students to have a learning environment where day one, they're actively engaged in the learning, where we're blending both the humanities and the technical, where we're actively pursuing questions of just because you can build it, should you? Think about all the things that are happening in social media and artificial intelligence and technology. It's a great example. Just because you can, should you? Well, how are we preparing students, of all learning types at different parts of their journey, but in this case, oftentimes coming out of, high school? How do you prepare them for a complex world, to be able to prepare them with the skills and the integrity and the ethics and the morals and all of those things that go into seeing your profession and looking at it through the lens of just because you can build it, should you? And that's really important to us. And then the third promise that we make folks is that every, higher ed is an amazing investment, but it's a significant investment and it should have a good return. So we share with folks that Letourneau leads the way in Christian higher education for return on investment. There's a study that's done annually by a group called PayScale, and it looks at more than 1,900 schools around the country, and that's all of higher ed, not just Christian higher ed. And Letourneau ranks number 219 in the entire country out of all 1,900. The next closest, and that's of the Christian universities within the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. It's a professional association. The next closest CCCU school is in the 500s. And so we have a very strong track record that when you come, you're well prepared. You're well prepared to lean into what God's called you to grow in your walk with Christ, and that you're going to have an amazing return on the investment you're making. And that's a wonderful thing for us to lean into when you think about being in the top 11% of all higher ed for return on investment. And so to your question and kind of closing the loop on my response is, what are we doing to combat all the changes that are happening in higher ed? Well, it's very important that we are clear on who we are, our identity in the market. It's also very important that we're clear on what we are not. And I think that that's really important, and to be okay with that. And I think we have an amazing story and really, really significant promises that I think families are looking for. And our goal here is to not survive the tumultuous, times we're in with higher ed. The goal here is to flourish. The goal is to come out on the other side by creating the conditions necessary to grow, to creating the conditions necessary to succeed and to win, to do it for the right reasons, and to do it ultimately to expand the missional impact of Letourneau. But the goal here at Letourneau is not to just get by. The goal is not to just navigate things or just survive. We're here to flourish. And by doing so, we are also able to now walk alongside students and families and help them do the same.
Well, it sounds like it was built on a really neat mission and you've got a very clear and, like you said, specific purpose now too. I would love to talk a little bit about your dissertation and the research that you did around joy and leadership. And I'm curious first, joy in leadership is an interesting topic. Where did that come from for you? Where did this idea come from?
Yeah. So if it's okay, let me tell you a quick story of how this all came about. So it was March. It was either end of February or 1st of March of 2020. It was literally about a week before the world shut down due to COVID. I was in Dallas, Fort Worth for a conference. And we've all been to many conferences. Some are better than others. Some you walk away where you're like, I really gleaned something, and others you were like, I feel like I heard that for the last 5 years. However, this particular conference was the best conference that I had ever been to in my entire career. And it was done by Patrick Lencioni. Just for those that maybe are not familiar, he's the author of The Advantage, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He's written many, many other books. One of his more recent is The Motive, The Working Genius. And it was an amazing conference. And it's not something that's done every year. It was only, I think, maybe the second time that they had done this. They called it the Unconference, which I found great amusement in. But I'll never forget, it was a room full of people for this conference from around the world, representing all these different industries. Remarkable conversation, remarkable people, remarkable program. But the keynote address for that conference in, again, that end of February timeframe of 2020 was a gentleman by the name of Alan Mulally. And Alan Mulally spent a good portion of his career as an executive with Boeing Aircraft. But in the mid 2000s, was recruited by the Ford family to become the CEO of Ford Motor Company. And he was the keynote address at this conference. Well, that really caught my attention. I was really, really looking forward to his speech because his is a career that I've kind of followed. I've read a lot of his writings at that time and read a lot about him, and just really admired how he approached leadership. And so I'll never forget, Andrea, that the conference session for the keynote begins. Patrick Lencioni is on stage. He's getting ready to introduce Malali. He goes through kind of the biography and says, and so now, would you welcome Alan Malali to the stage? Well, nobody's coming out of the green room. No one comes from the side of the stage. Instead, we all started to turn our attention to the very back of the room because he actually had been sitting with the audio people in the back. And he navigates his way through the crowd onto the stage. And later found out that's kind of one of the things he does a lot is so he can thank the people that are helping make these events possible. So that's an aside, but it was a really kind of a cool thing to watch. So here are the two of them, and they begin to kind of tag team this. How did they meet, and how they've started to kind of strike up the relationship over the years. And so it went something like this. So they're on stage, and Patrick Lencioni says, we were at a conference in Iowa. I don't remember the date, but they were at a conference in Iowa, and they were backstage, and they got to talking. He started talking to Alan Malali. Alan said, Patrick, I love your book, The Advantage. He said, it's an amazing book. Really well done. There's only one thing you got really wrong in it. And about that time, as they are telling the story, Malali had to go up to the stage at this Iowa conference to speak. And so it leaves Patrick Lencioni hanging on, he's written this, best-selling book. He's just been affirmed by truly a leading corporate CEO in the United States and really a global CEO. And leaves him hanging with, you've made a big mistake in it. I disagree with something in it. And so Malali comes off the stage. And so as they're, again, recounting the story, Malali says, I'll tell you what, how about you and your colleague hop on the jet with me, fly back to Michigan, Detroit. We'll talk about it. And then the jet will fly you all back to California, which is where they're based out of. So again, the two of them are on the stage talking to us, recounting this. And so Patrick says, so we get into the jet. I'm sitting right across from Alan Malali. He reaches down into his briefcase, pulls out my book, The Advantage, and it's all marked up, highlights and notes in it and Post-it notes, like he had consumed it. And Alan Malali says on the plane, if you'd go to page whatever, 187 or whatever the page number was, he said, Patrick, you state that leadership is a sacrifice. And I disagree with that. And so now the conference that I'm at, they're recounting that interaction they had. And Lencioni was asking, okay, what do you mean that it's not a sacrifice? There's so much that people that lead, they give up, or they put other things and people in front of their own. And so then it's like, well, if it's not a sacrifice, what is it? And Alan Malali says, leadership is a true joy and privilege. We get to do this. We get to lead. It's not a sacrifice. We get to lead. Now, those that are in leadership positions, it's not to say that there aren't sacrifices, and that's not the point they were trying to make, right? It's we all can kind of reflect on our experiences and say, you got to make those tough decisions on where you spend time, or what did you stop doing for a while to make time for something else. And so it's not to say that there aren't sacrifices, but what their point on the stage was if an individual approaches leadership through the lens of it is a sacrifice, it is I'm leading, but I'm losing out on this to lead. They say it makes it all about you. The motivation for leadership becomes, what am I losing? And Malali began to say, it is a joy and a privilege, and we get to do this. So now here I am sitting in this conference, and Malali begins to tell the story of Ford Motor Company when he started in the mid 2000s. It was hemorrhaging about $18 billion in cash. That's 18 billion with a B. This was a couple years before the financial crash, as many will remember. You'll also remember during that 2008 timeframe, there was a congressional hearing with the automotive CEOs, all the domestic auto companies, automakers. Malali and Ford Motor Company, they were the only ones that did not accept government money to kind of bail out, for those that remember. Mm-hmm. But Malali was there anyway to just show kind of support just for the industry and all of that. But I sat there and I'm thinking about, and really, and he turned Ford Motor Company around. It's truly one of the greatest corporate turnaround stories, I believe, of the last century or more. But I sat there, Andrea, and I thought, okay, here's a gentleman who cares deeply about people, leadership, has incredible expertise, but he takes on a position of a company that is losing $18 billion in cash, has no clear pathway to turn it around, then gets hit with then the financial crisis of 2008 and all the things that happened with that. How do you approach every day through the lens of joy? How's he doing it? And I started to process this question, and then I started to ask myself this question, just silently, just sitting there in the audience. Do I come to work each day leading with joy? Am I consistent in how I show up leading with joy? Am I selective with my joy? Do I see everything, the good and the bad, as a privilege to know that God has placed me in this moment, at this time, with this situation? It is now my responsibility, along with others, to steward this well and to get it right. And I thought, most people will never experience in their professional careers an $18 billion problem. Most won't. But I thought, what does it look like? What are the conditions necessary to have a mindset of joy as we approach leadership? All that to say, I sat there, and I was just wrapping up my first year of my PhD from Regent University School of Business and Leadership. And I had just finished up my first year and had not, they encouraged us in our program, don't be too quick to lean into a particular topic, be really kind of open-minded to what's happening in the research. And but in that moment, I thought that's an important topic. And so as I started to study the topic, there was very little research, academic and industry research on joy. But then when you start to look at joy and leadership, it was even less. And so what happened is when I started to work on my dissertation, what my focus is joyful leadership amidst tragedy and triumph. It was a qualitative phenomenological study that looked at the impact of joy in work and life. In essence, is what the focus was. It was to take a look at the lived experiences of others and look at the phenomenon of what does it mean to live and work with joy in what you and how you operate and how you live and how you lead, and how do you do that consistently when the times are good, and how do you do it when they're not good? That's a hard thing. I don't. It doesn't matter who you are and what you've done. Those are hard things to grapple with. We've all been in those situations where, in the good and bad, how do you approach life and work and leadership and caring for other people in a way that is not driven by the circumstances.
Oh, yeah.
And so as I started to dig into this, the research landscape at the time had kind of three pockets. You had joy as part of just the discipline of positive psychology. It was kind of lumped in with just the study of emotions, and that's where you started getting a lot of, okay, is it happiness? Is it joy? So there was that bucket of research. The second bucket was some emerging research around the 2020, 2021, somewhere in there, where there were some growing calls for more research to further develop the theology of joy and the science of joy, and what that would look like just in both life settings as well as work settings. And then the third bucket of research was the Institute for Health Improvement was the third bucket, where it was a workplace within kind of the healthcare field where they actually studied joy and the impact it had on the workforce and in that workplace. So if you take a look at it, it was looking at the kind of the human behavior, human emotion side. It then looked at the theology of joy, science of joy, started to introduce the spiritual component of it, and then you have the practical workplace. That was kind of the initial research work that I had done. But what came out of all of that was, in summary, there's an emerging call for us to pay more attention and to research the topic of joy and leadership and the impact that joy has. What the research was showing at the time is that we're not paying enough attention to joy, and that joy has an enormous amount of opportunity for us to elevate our perspective on things like leadership. And that was the early stage of my dissertation work. And I don't know if there's a follow-up. I'd be glad to talk to you about what I found in my research.
I would love to hear more about, well, first of all, can you give us a definition of joy?
Well, here, I think it ties directly to what I found.
Okay. Okay.
Because when you look at joy and happy oftentimes when you dig into it is very circumstantial.
Mm, yeah.
It's what's occurring around you that then drives whether you're happy or not. And that's a kind of a non-academic definition, but that's at the core of what we're saying. Are you happy or not? And then people immediately go into describing what's happening that's driving that kind of emotional response. What I found is that joy is something far deeper. It's sourced from something way deeper. There's more continuity to it, to where it's not driven, it's not sourced by circumstance. It's in spite of the circumstances. You think about in the first chapter of James in the Bible, where it talks about count it pure joy when you encounter a variety of trials here, and I'm paraphrasing here, but because it develops perseverance. It strengthens you. And I think that when we think about joy, especially from a Christian perspective, I think we're talking about a joy that actually doesn't come from us individually. I think it comes from some deeper source. And so in my case, the study I did was focused on it was our Christian faith from an evangelical Christian perspective, and for me, that is my source of joy, regardless of what happens or is happening. I know God's called me to this moment in time where He's going to prepare me well, but I also have a responsibility to respond appropriately. And so I think that when we talk about joy, joy is something that's far more deep rooted. It's something now. When you look at the secular research, it's not including that for obvious reasons, the Christian faith component. But what you'll find in that research is oftentimes it will take the form of mission, meaningfulness. So when you're looking at it from a secular perspective, sense of purpose, that's right. And so they're connecting their work, their life with those types of things. And so from a secular perspective, that's what's showing up. The idea, though, is that either bucket, they're attaching how they operate, how they think, and how they lead and work, their emotional response, from something far more significant and foundational than just the circumstance. And so that was very much throughout the research literature as well as my work. And what was interesting is at the end, there were five main themes that surfaced in my work. Um, what does it mean to lead joyfully?
Yeah.
And there were five main categories and themes, and then there were some very important kind of subpoints to that. In fact, that toward the end of my dissertation, I actually have a diagram that kind of visualizes the main categories as well as the subpoints. But the first major theme was the individual leader, the growth of a leader, if you will. And so it was very much focused on the only way that you position yourself well to lead joyfully and to lead others and to accomplish what's set in front of you in the workplace. You have to first look inward to say, am I preparing myself well to lead? That was very, very evident. And it was informed by things like experience. Someone's experience and their track record, the good things and the bad things. People either cave or they get stronger. And so what does that look like in the overall growth of you as a leader?
Which kind of sounds like resilience.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And so then it kind of leads to the second major theme, and that was mindset. So kind of to your point about resilience, when you really lean into as a leader, what am I doing to grow, to mature, to strengthen? Um, you know, things like we hear about all the time, the emotional intelligence and all of the things that go with navigating a very complex world. But the second category was the mindset of the leader. So, for example, joy is a choice. We choose. So, what are you doing to prepare yourself as a leader and to prepare your mind properly to see it through the lens of choosing joy? And when you think about back to the Alan Mulally story, that's exactly what his story was. He was choosing to see leadership as this is a privilege. This might be a very hard problem or a tragic problem, but it's a privilege that we get to be part of it. Um, that joy is contagious. So when you think about the mindset, it's not only a choice, but it's contagious. And if those listening to this or viewing this episode, think about the different people that you've encountered over the years in life or in work, where you walk away and you can't help but feel encouraged and filled with a joy that it's going to be fine, or we're going to get through this, or this is worth celebrating. So joy is a choice, joy is a mindset. And so as a leader, what are we doing to grow individually? Then what are we doing to strengthen our mindset, the resilience you're talking about, the perseverance, the overcoming, if you will. The third part then is if you're doing those two things well and you're leaning into it, it allows you to elevate your commitment to other people. It allows you to see your service to other people in a very different way. It allows you to care for people in a very different way. Think about a lot of people talk about servant leadership. There's lots been written about it. It's kind of when you look at leadership theory, it's a real go-to place, and there's so much value in that. But think about as an individual leader, how difficult it is to serve other people, which servant leadership theory, right, is all about putting the needs of others before yourself. That's really hard to do if you have not grown yourself as a leader and that you don't have the right mindset. Think about the people who don't come in with a mindset of joy. Are they really well positioned to help other people and care for other people? So that was the third theme is joy, leading with joy has to be about other people and to bringing them along the way. The fourth major theme was individual and collective results. And there's one thing, what I really love about this is so much of the research, it's not just about leadership preparation or how we lead, but all of us in the business world or organizational life, if you're not getting the results, there's a problem.
Hmm.
And so what I found is that the individual and collective success, a focus on results. Another way that kind of came through the research was a clear path, a vision, a mission. We're embarking on something that's truly transformative. We're part of something that's going to make a huge difference. We're a part of something that is far greater than us individually. It is us together. And so that was the results piece. And then the fifth part, again, this was from a Christian perspective, was just the incredible importance of us as leaders growing in our Christian faith, through prayer, the impact of the Holy Spirit on our life. When you think about the fruit of the Spirit and joy being part of that, absent of that, are we able to truly lean into what does it look like to lead and live with joy? And so again, the diagram included a lot of subpoints, but in summary, I think that those things are really inform what it looks like to define not only joy, but leading with joy, is that it's a choice. It requires resilience. Joy is contagious. You have to make sure that you're developing individually, getting your mind right, so you can encourage and walk alongside other people and serve them well. Having a clear vision of something that people can buy into, that it's greater than just one person, and then the role of our Christian faith and in encountering with strength and boldness and courage the challenging things that always come our way. We've all experienced them. So that was it was an amazing project. There's so much more work to be done in that. It's in no way a complete picture of joy and leadership, but it's been that work. It so influenced how I operate.
How has this changed you? Where have you seen the
Yeah,
impact in yourself?
it's there in so many ways, but the one thing that just comes to mind right out of the gate is that we all go about our day and encounter all of these different events, where that's really challenging. Whatever it is, it's incredibly hard. But it's that reminder of, but I get to do this. We're part of this. What's interesting, back to the Mullally and Lencioni story at that conference, is that they closed their presentation by saying that interaction that they had over that few-year period is ultimately what inspired Lencioni's one of his more recent books called The Motive. And if anyone's read The Motive, it's pretty much just saying there's two types of leaders. One is a selfish, and then the other one is a selfless. And some of Mullally's comments about seeing leadership as a joy and privilege, it's hard to see leadership that way if it's selfishly done. If your motivation for being a leader is all about you and what you get or what you're losing, then you've got probably you probably have an inaccurate view of leadership. And so that informed then the motive. And so for me, being able to go in each day and say, hey, you know what, that was a hard day, but it's okay because it's a privilege to do this. And I think that being able to not only believe that yourself, but then again, back to joy being contagious.
Yeah.
It has a ripple effect around the people around you. And to see people either directly or indirectly that are adopting the same kind of approach, to say it's okay if there's a hard day, we're going to get through it just fine. Or if there's a hard situation, to say we get to do this and we get to be here. That's amazing. And that is a freeing place to be.
That's exciting. I like that. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Andrea. And if I can maybe just add one more thing, Andrea, that I think maybe ties this in, because at the beginning of our conversation, you talked a little bit about the importance of brand and leadership. And so those that are so as you mentioned in the introduction, my background, a lot of it is higher ed, enrollment, and marketing, and sales, and all of these things. But I tell people all the time that a brand is a promise you keep. Brand is one of the most misunderstood topics, I think, in industry right now, because we hear it's anything from logos and colors to, what people sell, or what people say. But a brand is a promise that you keep. And leaders and organizations, I think it's really important for us to all ask questions of not only what are we promising, what are we promising? Who are we promising it to? And to what degree are we keeping the promise? If you can answer those questions well, then it gives you a great assessment of where your brand is, the strength of your brand, the impact of your brand, the admiration of your brand. Just being brand aware is not brand admiration. But and so as a quick example, most marketing people would hear, okay, it's the four marketing, the four P's of marketing, right? Product, price, placement, promotion. Most of it falls into the promotion category. That's the only thing people want to talk about oftentimes. But there's actually three more, and it has to start with the three before those four can work. And it's people, promises, and your past. You have to understand organizationally where you've come from and what you're about. You have to understand what you're promising, and you have to be authentic in those promises, and you have to also have a deep care for the people that are literally assigned to keeping those promises. If you don't get those three right, it doesn't matter what you do from a price, product, placement, or promotion piece. The reason why I share that is because I actually, and this is what I share with folks I have the privilege of working with over the years, is that same concept is true for leadership as well. There's an optimization, there's a leverage that happens between understanding brand and leadership. Because think about leadership. Leadership is all about rallying people around a common cause and then caring for them and influencing them in very meaningful ways. I mean, it's an informal definition of leadership, but that's exactly what we're doing. That's hard to do if you don't care for the people.
Yep.
And if you don't understand what you're promising people. And so if you think about the leaders, again, if your listeners are thinking through leaders that they've worked with or worked for, think about the times where you've been disappointed and think about the times where you've been encouraged. The people who aren't clear on what they're promising aren't very inspiring. The people who make promises that are empty and don't keep them aren't trustworthy. And so just in kind of a closing thought, I just want to encourage folks as we think about leadership is there's incredible joy in leadership. And we talked about that. But I think the other part is there's when you think about leadership in company and organization and teams, there's great synergy in optimization in brand. And I'm not talking marketing, I'm talking the brand.
Yep.
There's great synergy between brand and leadership. And when leaders don't understand brand, it's a problem. When the brand doesn't have good leadership, it's a problem. And I think that there's so many amazing examples of where that's been at play, where some get it right and they do it really well, others don't do it really well at all. And so that is kind of how I've kind of viewed kind of my marketing background and leadership background to say, as a leader, how do you live and work and operate with joy at the core? And how do you do it where you're very clear on what you're promising other people and then be very intentional about how you keep the promise? And I think that you position yourself well to serve other people and achieve amazing results.
Don, what do you want to share with us in terms of connecting with you?
For folks that want to connect, I invite that. I love to engage with folks. I serve at Letourneau University, and so of course that would be one way to connect. My email at Letourneau is Don Egle, so DONEGLE at letu.edu. Then, I am the founder and CEO of the Kyer Group, and it's thekyergroup.com. And welcome folks to, if you're a small business or a larger business or just an individual that wants to grow in kind of leadership and in how you're operating or to grow your business, I would invite you to do that. And then, of course, LinkedIn's probably one of the best ways. So LinkedIn /Don Egle, and would love to connect that way. I really appreciate Andrea, the conversation, appreciate everything that you're doing and to broker these kinds of conversations. It's meaningful, and I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, well, it's been a real pleasure. What last piece of advice would you like to give to somebody who would like to have a voice of influence?
Well, in addition to the things that you and I have had a chance to talk about, one thing that comes to mind is just a reminder that Progress compounds. Caring for others compounds. We've all had those days where you're like, man, it feels like it took 3 steps back. I think most people can relate to this. It's like, wow, I was making such progress, and then it took 3 steps back. But progress compounds, and that it may not feel that way. You may not fully see the fruit of whatever that investment is or how you handled a situation. You may not see it for years, but what are you doing today to be better than you were the day before, both as a leader, uh, within an organization, in the workplace, in life, and family? What are you doing today to be better than you were the day before? Because the progress compounds.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea.